Welcome OPN and other channels that are mirroring us. We appreciate your support, and we're really excited and fortunate tonight to have Matthew Louis-Rosenberg from RAMPS, West Virginia, and our friend Nate Grant, Occupy I, who everybody knows. And these guys are here to tell us, give us an overview on the RAMPS organization, some discussion about mountaintop removal, but specifically to discuss the Hobart mine shutdown that was successfully executed on Saturday, which was a big deal. If I'm not mistaken, the Hobart mine is the largest strip mine in the United States. So the amount, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Matt. You can correct me.
Sure. It's the largest mountaintop removal mine in the United States. It's the largest surface mine east of the Mississippi. But if you go out to the Powder River Basin, you'll see just strips that dwarf anything in size that we have out east. It's just they're mining there in flatter terrain, so they're not, removing as much material to get at the coal. They scrape off a pretty thin layer, and then they get to these 30-foot seams, which is why Wyoming, is producing the largest portion of the nation's coal these days. But nonetheless, I think it's a lot to say that we shut down the largest mountaintop removal site in the country and the largest strip mine east of the Mississippi. Enough right there.
Okay, and I really appreciate the fact that both of you can be here tonight. I know there's so much happening around your situation, your organization, and for those of you, Nate was texting me constantly because, of course, he had to spend another night in the airport, so he was breaking his neck to get here, and he is here via...
Never go with U.S. Airways. That's the second time I've had to sleep in the terminal because of U.S. Airways. Don't support them.
Okay, U.S. Airways on the blacklist. So let's launch right into it so we have plenty of time, and thank you again for everybody watching us, and we're going to try to make this really informative. We do have the Etherpad set up tonight for questions, which would have been good that if I'd had that open, but somewhere in there I'll jump on that, so give me a chance. So let's go ahead. Matt, is Matt okay, or says okay? Matt's good. Why don't you give us an introduction to yourself and tell us a little bit about RAMPS and describe your mission overall as far as your organization.
Well, sure. Well, for myself, I moved to southern West Virginia 4 years ago. Because of mountaintop removal, coal mining, and the incredibly beautiful struggle here that's happening against it from the Catskills of upstate New York. So, it's even according to the Appalachian Regional Commission, that qualifies as the northern end of Appalachia, and that's a lot of the reasons why I'm down here. I didn't come here to work on direct action. I actually came here to work with a community in Boone County where the groundwater had been contaminated by the coal industry disposing of the waste from processing coal into abandoned underground mines and then strip mining on top of it. And that had caused this community's water to go bad, black water in people's homes, enormous rates of illness in that community. And I started off coming down to do an emergency water distribution project to get clean drinking water because the state wouldn't do it. We'd asked every agency under the sun to get people emergency drinking water so they wouldn't be not so slowly killing themselves just by living in their homes. And they wouldn't do it, so we did it ourselves. But in my time down here, pretty early on, something sort of remarkable happened, and it's a lot to explain the context, but all the local organizers I was working with and the few kind of folks like myself that had come in outside to support reached a point where we felt like we needed to draw a line in the sand. We needed to escalate our tactics and, in a long series of very stressful, intense meetings where we were, asking ourselves the question, could we safely go onto a strip mine and disrupt operations, and weighing a lot of the risks, and what people ultimately decided was that absolutely it was worth it, worth the risks. Everyone agreed it was necessary, and so, these were some of the most amazing meetings I was ever in my entire life, and every local organizer that had been living on the river their whole lives and fighting this, told us it's time. We want you to take this step. Well, that was in February 2009, and since then I've been involved in the direct action campaigns here. We've done somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 actions over the last 3.5 years, with probably 300 or 400 arrests. And in 2011, that direct action campaign organized itself into RAMPS. Radical Action for Mountain People's Survival is sort of just the latest phase of what has been a long campaign of action here in southern West Virginia, founded in the January of 2011. And we undertake locally supported direct action against surface mining in southern West Virginia, and support the use of those tactics across Appalachia. And that's what we do. We work with a lot of people. I personally have a day job. Right? I'm not a full-time RAMPS person. I work for Coal River Mountain Watch, which is one of the local nonprofits founded in 1998 by residents of the Coal River Valley. So a lot of the same people. We're all, we're lobbying, we're working with the lawyers, we're doing community organizing, but we're also doing direct action. And one of the things that's really special about this movement is how unified and how integrated all the people using all these different tactics are. No one is sitting there telling you, don't do direct action, we just need to lobby, or don't lobby, we just need to do direct action. We're sort of all working on it together. So RAMPS is our attempt to add what we can contribute as people with this particular skills and the resources, personal resources, to be able to take these kind of risks. We see this as, what our sort of greatest contribution to the struggle against mountaintop removal is to continue to push the envelope and take escalating and aggressive nonviolent direct action to stop mountaintop removal.
Okay, great. And I was one of the questions I had, and you are specifically and directly a nonviolent action group, so which I can imagine is difficult sometimes in the face of what you run up against. But kudos to you guys for doing that. I wanted to get a sense, if you can tell us, of how large the RAMPS group might be. We know it's at least 20 people.
Well, what we've always said, and this is from before the RAMPS campaign existed, but that we're a campaign. We're not an organization. Mm-hmm. We don't have members, and it's sort of the old Earth First model, right? You want to come here, you want to take direct action against mountaintop removal. Congratulations, you're part of the RAMPS campaign.
Okay.
So, there is a group of us that live here in southern West Virginia full time, and that group fluctuates in size. Sometimes there's as few as maybe 7 or 8 of us. Sometimes there's more. But the door's always open. Give us a call.
I like that.
The membership.
Yep.
Or there's membership. There's only one requirement to be a part of the campaign. Come here and do it.
Show up. Yep. I like that. That's a qualification a lot of people can make. So I want to just touch on your mission just a bit. RAMPS is specifically focused against mountaintop removal, or is it, like you spoke to water quality and things like that? So do you guys address multiple issues, or your concentration is mostly on mountaintop removal?
We're a very focused pressure campaign that is focused with a laser beam on ending mountaintop removal. We're a locally rooted campaign. We're not, we're not the parachutists. We're not the cowboys hopping all over around the country. Not that that's a bad thing, but We're rooted in place. We've been doing, we've been running this campaign, in the same part of the state, in various ways, like I said, for almost the last 4 years now. And we certainly do a lot of solidarity and support work for folks addressing other extraction issues, particularly in Appalachia, but as much to the extent we can around the country. And that's something we've really placed a priority on lately. So even while we were gearing up for the mountain mobilization, which was clearly a huge undertaking, we took about a week out to go up to the Earth First rendezvous in Pennsylvania and support some action against fracking there. So, while our mission is narrow, we recognize that, we're part of a unified and a growingly more unified anti-extraction movement across the region and across the country. And we do as much support work as we can, because it's only by doing that work that we've built the kind of solidarity that allowed something like the mountain mobilization to happen.
Right. Just for the people who are not familiar with mountaintop removal, I live in a county in North Carolina, the northwestern end of the county that butts up to Tennessee, and within 10 minutes of my house are two small mountaintop removal operations, mica and feldspar mines, but it's the same thing. They just take that. But for people who are not familiar with that, can you just give a brief description of what happens and what some of the ramifications are?
Sure. I mean, mountaintop removal is a wonderfully descriptive name that we did not come up with. That's actually a term that originally comes from the industry for the practice. It's hard to believe because it is so literally true. So this is a sort of extreme form of strip mining. They first, cut down all the trees and usually burn them. They don't usually do anything with them. Scrape off all the topsoil and blast up to 1,000 feet of elevation off the top of a mountain to get at thin coal seams that are lying underneath. A lot of the resultant waste, they call it overburden or spoil, polite words for blown up mountain, and that's often dumped into an adjacent small valley, filling that in. And what's really, you spoke to some of the small mines that are in your area, and certainly strip mining is something that goes on all over the country with a lot of nasty effects. But of course, I think some people, right, they've seen a gravel pit maybe somewhere near them, and maybe they think it's horrible, maybe they don't. But what's really hard to understand about the situation in Appalachia is the scale. We're talking in central Appalachia, since mountaintop removal really got going in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, we've lost a land area the size of the state of Delaware. We're talking over 1 million acres have been disturbed, and the mine site that we were on Saturday is over 23 square miles of devastation. We're talking about an area roughly half the size of the District of Columbia that is now essentially a wasteland. Supposedly they're required to reclaim this back to the original contour, and they'll put the forest back just the way it was. Of course, the reality is that this, consists of spraying hydroseed, fertilizer and invasive grass seed, and planting a few scraggly trees that don't do very well, and ending up with a landscape that looks like it maybe belongs in the northern plains and not in the most biodiverse temperate hardwood forest in the world. So obviously there's devastating effects on the land, the water. What is only becoming more and more clear now is the effects that it has on the health of the people that live here. So there's been an enormous amount of science coming out over the last several years about that. A recent study found that babies that were born in counties with mountaintop removal had a 42% greater chance of having a birth defect than some that lived in an Appalachian county where mining was not occurring. Put that in perspective, that's several times the risk that a baby has if their mother chain smokes the entire pregnancy. So we're finding higher rates of cancer. We're finding lower life expectancy. A woman in the coal fields has a life expectancy that's 10 years shorter than the average American woman. And USGS has just released even more information that they've been collecting recently, documenting the toxins that are in the air, the soil, and the water, and we're learning more and more what coalfield citizens have always known, which is that this practice is not only destroying these landscapes, and one could care about this from a strictly kind of conservationist perspective, but it's killing people, quite literally. This is a life or death issue, and it's a life or death issue for individuals, and it's a life or death issue for communities. There are a number of towns that existed when I moved here 4 years ago that are gone. When I say gone, I mean no one is there, all the houses have been bulldozed, and it's being mined. Lindytown probably being the example that has gotten the most press. Even the New York Times covered the disappearance of Lindytown. But this is something that's been happening for 30 years. And the depopulation in the southern coalfields of West Virginia has been dramatic. And in a lot of those cases, though not all of them, they were bought out, pushed out specifically so that mining could move into that area without the interference of the inconvenience of human life.
That's a good point, and I do have a whole list of conversation that I want to have around the effect on people in the community and all that. But I want to get Nate in here, so he doesn't feel like the Maytag man over there. Nate was in advance of the action by a few days, and I was wondering if you could tell us, Nate, what brought you to the region and the intent to cover the action.
I basically just saw it pop up, and it was a new issue to me, and I like new issues, so it's mainly it. And I went down there. There were a couple other things that happened that day. There was the big anti-fracking march in D.C., I believe, on Saturday, and I think also something in Vermont.
Right, Burlington, there was something. So it was kind of the day Saturday ended up being, whether it was coordinated or not, pretty much a day of protests against environmental atrocities. So, I felt really good about that. But it was great to have you there and on the scene, and I'm really, really happy you can be here with us tonight, because we're going to be able to get a couple of different perspectives, which is a unique thing for us. So, Matt, can you speak, and Nate, chime in here as with observations you had, to some degree about the background of the action planning and evolution, the lead up to that? Was that a fairly involved process? Because I was struck by the degree of organization that had to happen. This was not just an accidental thing where everybody got up one morning and said, hey, let's go do this. And part of our channel that we try to do is educate and inform people. So I really love to point to successful organized action. So whatever you can tell us about that, we'd love to hear it. And feel free to speak in broad terms, or as specific as you would like to be.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is not something that anybody could pull off in a week or a month. I would say that the first conversations that were really moving strongly in this direction were probably in December, if that gives you a sense of how much time it really takes to get something this big together. And honestly, you could really say that this has been 3 years in the making. This is a place we wanted to get to when we started doing direct action on surface mines in February of 2009. And it's taken us this long to get here. So for folks that are building campaigns out there, don't get discouraged when you don't sort of reach the dream scenario right away. That it's taken us years of building allies and building knowledge and building skills to get the confidence and the support necessary to pull off something this large. We haven't done quite something like this before, where we just publicly announce flat out, this is the day, we're coming. and we're going to come with as many people as possible and shut it down. The actions have been a lot more covert for the most part until you're there before now. So it was an interesting balance for us to strike also in terms of wanting to publicize this event so folks like you, Nate, out there in the world that aren't part of our movement, right, that aren't people that we call up because we know them to come help out, could come and participate and to really try to make this something bigger.
Well, now you know me, so you better give me a call in the future.
I know, you're on the list now, right?
Awesome.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's an enormous amount of work. Obviously, picking a target is extremely complicated. It took a long time to decide where you're going to go. There's 100 different considerations from parking to physical accessibility to how active is the site to how good is the messaging to what does the community right around that particular mine think. Different communities are more or less supportive. Obviously, down here, it's a very divisive issue. There's a lot of people on both sides, and certain areas are just friendlier. They've got a longer history of resistance than others. And what I thought was funny was that everyone and their grandmother was convinced that they knew where we were going. This is one of these points. Everybody, our allies and our enemies, all thought that they had it locked down and we were coming to them. Not only did everybody think they knew where we were going, everyone assumed they were coming to them. We had I can't remember how many counties we heard that, coal operators were telling their workers, or workers were telling each other, get ready because the tree huggers are coming. We heard one mine owner in Braxton County, which is relatively far away from where we've ever operated before in the past. And I think most of us aren't even really aware of mining in Braxton County in our movement. There is some, and apparently the owner of that mine told his employees that 500 angry environmentalists were going to come and beat them up on Saturday. And apparently that's what they were getting ready for. And I think as Nate can attest, clearly nobody really did know where we were going because...
No, they're at the front of the site when we finally got there, and I guess we will be bringing up the details a little later. There was only one woman in the sort of like a security checkpoint that said, hey, you're trespassing, and we just went right in. Yeah, no police there, and it took a while for them to finally come out to us. But yeah, they had no clue that was the site we were headed to, and so good work, RAMPS WV organizers on that one.
That's an impressive amount of organizational security, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, you just don't talk to anybody you don't know.
Well, it's a good point, right? People you can trust. Yeah.
But at the same time, right, we're organizing this big public action. We're getting lots of people to support it. We're putting everything out there, and I think this is an important lesson too. You don't have to be paranoid about everything. I mean, pretty much the only piece of information we kept secret was where we were going and exactly how we were getting there. And everything else, right, we could make public. What's the harm? And we'll find out a little bit about when you see the forces that were arrayed against us, what maybe the harm is in giving a publicly announced action like this. But we thought it was an important step to take to do that.
I had just a quick follow-up question. You are nonviolent. Does that include property? We
have an extremely strict, extremely traditional code of nonviolence. Maybe more so than any other campaign I've ever worked with. Not only is property destruction and vandalism out of the question, I mean, our definition of violence includes verbal violence. You won't see any of us at our actions. You won't see us yelling at police. You won't see us yelling at miners. You won't see us yelling at anyone. We strive to be open, honest, and friendly to the maximum extent that we safely can be with everyone we meet. Right. Because people that we encounter in the course of our action, primarily miners and their supporters, they're not the enemy, right? They're put in the same shitty situation that everybody else in their community is in. And they may be very angry at us, but we're not really angry at them.
Right.
They're stuck in a mono economy where there's very few ways to earn a decent living, and
Yeah.
they're scared.
Yep. And I wanted to make that point because I know a little bit of the story of the aftermath, but it's important for the viewers to have the context that the nonviolence included the whole scope of it, because it's going to become very important here in a few minutes. So why don't we, the two of you, just kind of take us through the evolution of how the action took place as much as you can, and just kind of share that between yourselves. I won't question unless something pops into my mind. But from I guess the early morning of Saturday morning, or late Friday night, wherever you want to start, up until the say, get us through when the law enforcement arrived.
You want me to take that one? You want to go ahead?
Well, I guess
we should start with the early morning stuff, and then when we get to the on the ground stuff, I could talk about that.
Was Nate sleeping in and getting coffee?
Well, we were in two different places for this entire event, so it's nice that there are both of us here, because we actually did two things that day, and one kind of ended right as the next one was beginning, so it'll make a little chronology here. So we had wanted folks that couldn't come to our training camp to be able to participate and join with us, especially since a lot of our local allies, right, can't take 3 days out of their life to go camp in a field and get a bunch of training in direct action. So we decided we would also have a small public training and rally in the Kanawha State Forest right outside of Charleston that morning. So that's where I was, and I was staying in an apartment in Charleston the night before, so I got there somewhat after everyone else, and really as soon as I opened the door to my car, the tone was set for what the morning was going to be like. Before I even got out, actually, I found out, I spoke to two people that had just been detained for questioning for really no reason by the state police. They informed me that two of our other folks were still being detained, and at least one was seemingly being arrested. Now, the action hadn't even begun. The rally hadn't even begun at this point. And on the other side of me, the medics were treating someone whose ankle had been run over, accidentally by one of us. So that really set the tone for the morning. It turns out that what was happening at that time on the other side of the forest was that two folks that had been just putting up signs directing people as to where to go in the state forest had been stopped by the police, detained and questioned. The driver of the vehicle, his insurance paperwork was 8 days out of date, so his vehicle was impounded. And the passenger was asked only one question, and they were asked at first, do you have identification? He said no, because he didn't have his license or passport with him. They took him out of the car, searched him, found his debit card, said, well, this is a form of ID. You just lied to me. I'm arresting you for providing false information to an officer. And into the cop car he went. For the next 2.5, 3 hours, the cops confiscated his cell phone and his debit card and left him out on the side of the road with no means of communication and no access to money. And he had to hitchhike to town which took him several hours. And to understand why that's such a big deal, you have to understand what else was going on, both in Kanawha State Forest and really around the region in the lead up to this. There was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 angry coal miners and their supporters in Kanawha State Forest. We had publicly announced where we were going to be on the news, so they were there too. So not only did they leave him by the side of the road, they left him on the side of the road at a day where there was an enormous amount of hostile traffic, and left to hitchhike. And this was just the first instance of the day of the police kind of putting our lives in danger, which really became a theme for the rest of our experience. So there was an enormous amount of state police. There was a small number of us from the camp. There was a small number of folks that had managed to join us But that gathering only ended up being about 30 people because it turned out the state police had set up barricades at most of the entrances to Canal State Forest and were detaining people, searching vehicles, checking their paperwork, and not letting them in. So we really have no idea how many people tried to join us and support us. Some vehicles did get through, most did not. There was an enormously heavy state police presence on scene, as well as a large counter-demonstrator presence. We're also blessed, though, that 2 people made it through, arguably the father and grandfather of our movement. 2 men named Ken Heckler and Larry Gibson were able to come and speak. Both legendary figures. I won't take time to tell their stories, but look them up. And so, we had the press, we had a small gathering, and at a certain point, the larger group of counter-demonstrators showed up, probably about 60 or 70, blowing horns and screaming. And the police, because we had actually rented these pavilions, in this case, did keep them on the other side of the road from where we were gathered. We just had a small group of peacekeepers across from them. But something really remarkable happened, and it's a part of the story that hasn't been told. And I think it's incredibly important. So, like I said, the counter-demonstration originally was incredibly raucous. And while I was up dealing with some other things, I noticed that it got very quiet. And I wondered what was going on, and I walked down, and the screaming and the yelling had stopped, and a local Charleston resident that was with us had managed to strike up a facilitated dialogue about the economic future of West Virginia and what people would do without coal. Now, I won't try to paint too rosy a picture. It's not that anybody ended up coming to any sort of agreement on the issues. I think people were just as far apart. But what happened is something that I've never seen at one of our demonstrations where there's these counter protesters, which has happened many times in the past. There was actually a civil, polite, for the most part, conversation that really happened back and forth with people asking each other real questions and answering with real honest answers. And by the end, we had miners and their supporters shushing each other so they could hear our answers to their questions and raising their hands when they wanted to speak.
That's an outstanding story. I think that alone makes it a success, right? I mean, that's a big step.
Totally unprecedented for us in our experience. I've had those conversations one-on-one with strip miners many times, but in a setting like that, at an active demonstration, this is a really new thing, and I think a really positive step for not only for our movement, but for Southern West Virginia as a whole and as a community that is really going to need to come together across these lines to address a rapidly changing future that they're facing. So that part was great, right? And we were very nervous. Obviously we had already had one person arrested for essentially no reason. Police presence was very heavy. There were more than enough police on scene to arrest everyone that was at this rally. And so, as well as 150, 200 angry miners somewhere scattered about the forest. And we had hoped that we would be able to go from there to the surface mine, but the decision was made that was not feasible. So everyone got in their cars and headed back to the Capitol, waiting with bated breath to hear the other shoe drop. And besides the purpose of that rally being, to provide our supporters that couldn't come to the camp with somewhere to go, it was also a bit of a distraction. We had more cops there than you could possibly ever want in one place, while some other people were quietly making their way along the roads to the Hobent surface mine. And at this point, I'm going to give my newfound friend Nate here the floor for quite a while and give the eyewitness account of the action itself because he experienced every bit of it.
Okay, get your popcorn ready because this is a long story. So early, go ahead, Mark.
We got all night. You just go with it. We want to hear every bit of it.
All right. So the morning at the camp, about half the camp left at 7:30 to go to Kanawha State Forest, to meet up over there, and then about the other half, it was like 50 and 50. The other half of the group left at 9:30. That's a group I was with, and that's a group that headed to Hobet, the Hobet coal mine. So we left at 9:30. It was a caravan of vehicles, just beautiful, and I did tweet out some pictures of that. Before I lost signal, sadly, I could not stream when we were there. But about 15 to 20 vehicles in a caravan riding out to the coal site, the MTR site, and I think it took us about 3 hours to get there. Left at 9:30, and we were there by 1, so 3.5 hours to drive all the way out there. We get out, and we only had there's one security person at the front gate that we walked past. We went in. Now, beforehand, there had been a bunch of groups that had organized amongst themselves. The RAMPS organizers basically said, form up groups and do what you want and stay within these strict and nonviolent parameters. And it worked out greatly. And I think there were between 4 and 6 affinity groups that organized themselves, figured out what exactly they wanted to do, whether they wanted to lock down to the equipment or form soft blocks or anything that could help the action be propelled forward. I think I was with 3 or 4 affinity groups, and we march up, and basically what happened was there was an affinity group there with art and banners. There was one with lockdown equipment, and another that formed a soft block. And we came up to a uke truck with this. Matt, what exactly is a uke truck?
So a uke truck is basically the world's largest dump truck. It's what's used to haul blown-up mountain and sometimes large piles of coal around these mountaintop removal sites. And maybe you can find a picture for your viewers here, but the tires are about 3 times taller than you and I are. And as one protester so aptly put it in a video we put out, we're not fucking around. We're on a mine site. There are trucks bigger than houses I've lived in. And that's absolutely true. And the scary part may be that a uke truck is one of the smaller pieces of equipment that operates on these sites.
Yeah, so these trucks are like 3 stories tall at the least. You can stand underneath these things, without having to bend. And they've got a sort of a catwalk on the front that you can climb these stairs on the front of the truck. And those who wanted to lock down to it climbed those steps and walked down to the top. I think there were about 5 people up top who locked down. And what also was sort of figured out in the few days that we had to organize at the camps was these affinity groups were well organized. They each had their own position. You had legal support, you had police liaisons, you had direct support. So if someone locked down, you had people there making sure that the people who were locked down were hydrated, had food, anything that they needed while they were locked down. They're there to help. So there were positions set out. This wasn't just, hey, let's go on and wreak havoc. It was well organized, and it was planned. So a group locked down. It climbed those steps up, locked down to the top. The other group with all the banners and art dropped them all and attached them to the staircase heading up. And that's sort of, I think, been the iconic picture of the action. And another group formed a soft block sort of in between there by the truck. And that was it. We had done the action. And then the police rolled up. There's about 12 squad cars, I think I counted. And this is about an hour in to the action. And this whole thing, we were on site for about an hour and a half, those of us who didn't get arrested, and it felt like 10 minutes. It was quite an adrenaline-fueled experience. When the police rolled up, a few people actually unlocked themselves and moved further into the coal site. That small group included Dustin Steele, who we were working so hard to get out of jail. He got out yesterday because after his arrest at some point, it seems he had been beaten by the police, or I don't have that full story. I think Matt does. We can get into that later. And another couple of people had, as soon as we set foot on the site, made a beeline to what's called a drag line. And I'm going to throw it over to Matt again for some coal site equipment rundown. Matt, what's a drag line?
Dragline's one of the largest pieces of earth-moving equipment in the world. Full-size dragline is about 220 feet tall. There is a control base that is the size of a building, and these things are so big they can't have tires. They have feet. They have to walk, and you know, my guess is that the house that you live in, if you do live in a house and not an apartment building, and you're listening, would fit inside the scoop of this thing. And so it's got a giant shovel on the end of a long cable on a boom, and they literally drag that shovel across the land to scrape up the mountain after they've blasted it into rubble. Yeah, I mean, until you see a picture of one of these things and see a pickup truck looking like a Matchbox toy in the photo next to it, it's really hard to appreciate the scale.
So that's basically what happened in terms of the affinity groups and the actions. One person locked down to that drag line, and the other person who was there was their direct support, taking care of them the whole time until the police found them. So the police roll up, 12 squad cars or so, and immediately they get out of their cars and are walking up, and they have, you know, the largest bundle of zip ties I've ever seen to make arrests. You know, this huge, you know, ball of handcuffs. And as you know, I guess the commanding officer asked one of the miners. He said, "Have you warned them to get off site?" And one of the miners had. He said, "You are trespassing, and the police are on their way." And so this miner said, "Yes, they've been warned," and immediately beeline to the soft block line, who did not want to ultimately get arrested, just wanted to hold space as long as they could and then leave at the last moment possible. The police officer made that very quick, said, "You are under arrest unless you leave right now." And so we left. We were not there to get arrested, and we left. You know, there were about 5 to 8 people still in that youth truck. And there were a total of 20 arrests, and I don't have the exact locations of all the arrests in my head. So maybe there were actually about 10 people on that youth truck, or maybe more. And so I slowly made my way out. You know, this whole group, we slowly made our way out. 2 photographers went too slowly and got themselves arrested. And I have footage of that. I do have a bunch of footage. I couldn't stream, so I was filming, and I do plan while I'm here at home, relaxing a bit, I'm going to be putting together a video from the footage I have. So, and in my footage, I have 2 photographers getting arrested, 1 female-bodied person getting dragged off the youth truck, actually. Apparently she went limp, and the police had to drag her off. And then 1.2 police officers started heading towards us. So I was like, all right, we got to go, and then we just left. And some miners met us and escorted us out. Now, when we were walking, you know, during all of this, there's the whole story of what was going on with the 15 to 20 vehicles that were sitting in front of the coal mine site. What had happened was the police took their license plates, and I think some of the driver information, and told them if they were to return to this site, they would be arrested and their cars would be impounded. Meanwhile, all the counter-protesters' vehicles were allowed to block the road. You know, so we're marching out, and it's going to be hard to see because I'd like to explain this visually. We probably can't. So in front of us was a state police car, and to the left of that car on the road were about 50 to 100 counter-protesters. I didn't get an amazing look at them. We had to go the opposite direction that the vehicles were forced to go, which was a problem, especially if the vehicles couldn't turn around and come back towards us. So ultimately, we ended up having to walk 4 hours, about 10 miles, while all the arrests were occurring, and some of the organizers, the RAMPS organizers, were working on getting an okay to send some vehicles out to pick us up. There were about 30 of us who did this long walk, and the entire time, counter-protesters were driving their vehicles at our walking pace and yelling at us from their cars. At one point, someone deep in the woods shot a paintball gun at us. None of the paintballs hit anybody, because as soon as a paintball hits like a leaf even, it just drops. We had paintball guns shot at us. A lot of physical violence was threatened to us. A passing vehicle threw a stick out the car, and that hit me in the butt. So I got a bruise on my butt from one of these counter-protesters. So that was 4 hours of basically that going on. And by the end of that, there were, I'd say, 10 to 20 lined-up counter-protest vehicles just going our walking pace. And finally, we saw one of the vans that had dropped us off can hold 14 people. There were 30 of us there, so we saw one of the vans. The other one pulled up and an SUV, so we could all load up. We did load up, and then the counter-protest vehicles blocked us in. And we were left with no recourse but to call the police, which took 2 hours. During this, so we were blocked in for 2 hours, and during this.
Can I interrupt for a minute, Nate? Because
sure.
I just want to. So the action took place. You exited the action. The police, for all intents and purposes, prevented you from returning to your vehicles so you could depart the site. So to the knowledge of the police, you all went in the other direction, with the counter-protesters following. Like, this was no great mystery to law enforcement, right? There was a point where we asked the police officers, like, are you going to be able to allow the other vehicles in? We had no cell reception out here, so we had no idea like where our friends were, where our drivers were, how we were going to get out of there, how long we were going to be walking even. Asked them, why can't they come back here? And this police officer told us that the roads had been shut down to only the residents, which wasn't true. I mean, because we had all these counter-protesters driving along with us, and at one point we stopped at a post office, which apparently was privately owned. We thought because it was a post office it would be publicly owned, we could stop there in the shade. And the owner came out and said, none of these people live around here, so they don't represent the people who actually live around this coal site. So that was a big, raised a bunch of flags. So then why are the police allowing them to drive through here, yet not allowing our people to come pick us up? Police did not give us an escort or anything, so it was basically the kind of protesters could have their way with us for a little while. I think my point was that the police consciously and deliberately put you at risk. And
I would say 100% absolutely yes.
And I want to say hello to the alphabet agencies, because I know you're watching and listening, and that's not a very nice thing to do. So, okay, I just wanted to make that point so everybody was. So we're at the two pickup vehicles that came to finally pick you guys up, and now you're surrounded by the counter protesters.
Yep, so we're blocked in, and we ended up being blocked in there for about 2 hours. By this point, we were happy to have a place we could sit and air conditioning and everything. So, but there were a couple people who were willing to listen to us and have a discussion. It sounds like it was a much smaller scale than what Matt had at Kanawha State Forest earlier, but there was a woman and her child who at first was very angry with us, and we had a discussion with her. And by the end of this 2 hours, she was smiling and waving at us when we pulled out. So all the little bits of outreach possible, I think, we took advantage of doing as much as we could. So the police come and they let us get out, and then they disappear. So police are gone again. They're not really, they're not going to provide us an escort or anything. And we're leaving on the highway, and about 10 vehicles followed us for about 2 hours. I have footage of that as well, and that will be posted when I do finally get this video together. So they followed us about 2 hours until they dropped off one by one, and that's basically it. Then we met up with another group in a parking lot and split the vehicles that we had up into people who wanted to begin jail support, which isn't, like jail support that we see with Occupy, where you go sit in front of the courthouse or the jail. because the jails in at least that part of West Virginia were privately owned, so you can get arrested for being at the jail. So jail support was done off-site for the most part. I actually would say just about, for all of it. And then the other group went back to camp, and that's mainly how the day went.
Okay, and so Nate, I have to guess that an awful lot of this experience was new to you. Like I'm somewhat familiar with some of this stuff, but like the private jails, that just never crossed my mind. And Matthew, this is things that you have to contend with for every action and every organizing event, and I mean, this is your life, right?
Oh yeah, and we try to do as much in the way of briefing and training as we can, and as we move into sort of discussing some of the legal response, I think Nate, was that maybe one of mine or maybe somebody else's. We don't call them know your rights trainings because we feel like that's disingenuous. That know your rights sort of implies that you have them. We call it a legal briefing. But it's really, we live in it's a crazy environment we operate in, and I've had to, as I've been working with some national allies in the follow-up, sometimes it's hard to explain to them the West Virginia context, and sometimes I have to tell them, look, it doesn't make any sense to you. That's West Virginia. Yeah.
What's crazy that I noticed was with Occupy and protesting in cities, if people are jailed longer than a couple of days, out. But during those legal trainings, it was like, yeah, you're likely going to be in there for a week at the minimal. Blew my mind. It's very, 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 very different atmosphere out there in West Virginia.
And I think this is a good education for all of us. I'm probably a little more familiar with it because I live in a small rural area too. But the people that are watching that are in large cities and large communities, I have found out by just reading and researching this particular action that the laws can actually come down to the local level's arbitrary positions. I mean, it literally says, like, what got me on that was the whole thing with the magistrates, and I never knew that magistrate law could be arbitrarily decided at the local level. And now I know that. So it's important for people to understand the context in which you were operating, because it is unfamiliar to a lot of people. And this is not to pick on the people of West Virginia or anywhere else. It's just that we live in a country that has quite dissimilar things going on across geography. So I just wanted to get that in. So continue on with the story. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I mean, I think I jump in here quickly and speak to that a little bit. I mean, and part of what makes it a different context is that West Virginia has been under the boot of the coal industry since the late 1800s, and large out-of-state landholding companies. You understand, the last time they did, I've got a friend that's updating this study right now, but in 1974 they did a land ownership and mineral rights, because in Appalachia, just because you own your land doesn't mean you own the coal underneath it, and doesn't mean you could stop somebody from mining the coal underneath it if they do own it. So the last time this was done, right in 1974, they found, like, Boone County, which is where most of this mine complex is. The action was in Lincoln County, but most of that surface mine is in Boone County. 90% of the land is owned by out-of-state landholding companies, and 97% of the coal. The guy who went on to found the largest law firm in the state, which is pretty much an agent of the industry and defends against citizen claims. There's this notorious law firm, Jackson Kelly, around here, right? big heavy hitters. Well, the person that founded that law firm was the first U.S. Attorney General for the state of West Virginia when it joined the Union during the Civil War. So, I mean, they set this stuff up from the beginning, right, to be the system of oppression. And honestly, things are a lot better here than they were 100 years ago when the folks that lived here lived in company towns where the company owned the house and the company owned the store and the company owned the church and the company owned everything. And they didn't even pay you in U.S. currency. They paid you in company script, which could only be spent with them. So, of course, the prices at the company store, every time wages went up, prices would too. So, I mean, it's important to both in a context of why things are so fucked up, especially with the legal system in the state, and the kind of repression that we faced. Okay, that's repression that's been going on for 100 years, but the resistance also is a tradition that we're walking in, and I encourage people to look up the history of the United Mine Workers of America, the history of Blair Mountain. So, we're one thing that I think is unique is not only is there this long history of oppression, which results in all these things that make you go, holy cow, is that really how it works in West Virginia? But also an incredibly long history of resistance and a long history of direct action. Mm-hmm. So I think in a lot of places, people ask us, oh, isn't this alienating? Isn't this an alienating tactic? Because they're coming from comfortable middle and upper middle class communities where direct action is outside of people's experience. It's weird. It's alienating. It's strange. Here, people's parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, they've been doing this stuff since before any of us hippies ever, a term of endearment here. Don't take offense to it. But any of us, outsiders came around, and mostly not particularly nonviolent. So people may not agree with us, but it's not they don't understand what we're doing here. They understand it maybe better than anybody in these urban contexts where protest is sort of more normalized, but maybe less understood.
Okay. I want to get a couple of more questions about the action in, and I want to talk about some of the social political ramifications about this. So you eventually made it safely back. You're doing jail support. So let's get an update on that, because I read the articles just before we went live, so I know. But you had 20 people of the group arrested. There was the whole thing with the magistrate and the bail and all that. So where does things stand with that now?
Well, we're very happy to report that as of today, 10 of those 20 people are out of jail. However, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. However, the remaining 10 people are in the same circumstance they have been in all along. They are in the Western Regional Jail. They have $25,000 bails for misdemeanor charges of trespassing and obstruction of an officer, which is outrageous. You'll see violent offenders, released on their own recognizance in the state not too often. There's someone else that went to the jail system around a similar time that we did. We noticed was a pretrial felon with a $5,000 bond. Still to get those people out, that's $250,000, or $25,000 paying a bail bondsman that we never see again. And they don't have a bail reduction hearing until Tuesday. So fortunately for our other folks, a bail reduction hearing was held today, and instead of the bails being reduced, they were offered a plea deal to plead guilty just to trespassing, which one has to admit they were. And they received a $500 fine, which was the maximum for the charge, and 1 year of unsupervised, as I understand it, unsupervised probation. That's what's typical in this state. Have to confirm that detail. So 9 people took that plea deal. We bonded Dustin Steele out yesterday because we were concerned about their physical condition after being beaten by the state police while in custody. We can talk more about that story. And Dustin has not taken the plea deal, but the other 10 folks have a different magistrate and have not been offered a deal and have no, real prospect of their situation changing at this point before Tuesday.
Okay. So there's still 10 more in jail, different magistrate, and we just have to let that unfold, and we'll get an update on that Tuesday. Meanwhile, I know we have all your links and everything, and so it's a good time to just toss that. You're still collecting funding to help them out of that situation and all that, correct? And we'll post all that towards the end. I want to be sure we get that in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely still taking donations to our legal defense fund. It's also important for people to know that's a permanent fund that is housed in Mountain Justice. It's a regional network of small groups like ours, and so that fund, regardless of how court shakes out, and regardless of how much we end up needing to spend to get our friends and comrades released from this action, just want to be so folks know that's a fund that's permanently available to anyone throughout Appalachia that is taking direct action against mountaintop removal. And as bail money comes back, when we are able to pay full bail and we get it back as people's charges are resolved, that goes right back into a revolving fund to help support more activists that take action in the future. So, we really encourage people to continue donating to this fund. It's really critical to our ability not just to help these 10 people that are still incarcerated, but also be able to continue this work and continue to escalate this work and, frankly, hopefully have more people behind bars before too terribly long. So, yes, please donate. There's also a petition. We're asking the U.S. Attorney General for the Southern District of West Virginia, Booth Goodwin, to immediately open an investigation into police misconduct on Saturday. So go ahead and get on there and sign that. And yeah, just stay tuned for other ways you can continue to support folks. If you go to our website, you can also see some of the names of the people that are still incarcerated, and they would really appreciate it if you would go ahead and write them a letter.
Oh, that would be nice. That would be great. We'll touch back on that all before we wrap up tonight. Just a couple more quick questions. How many of the mine people were at the site? Was it just a few, or very many? And what were their reactions? Were they mostly neutral and factual, or were there some resistance there? I know you said you walked past the little security shack, and
but your question about the miners themselves?
Yeah, on the site.
So we got in, and it seems they were pretty sparse, actually. Luckily, they had just wet down all the raw soil. Normally, actually, to what I've heard, coal sites are very dusty places, but they had just hosed down the whole site, which made it a lot nicer than it probably would have been otherwise. But there weren't too many miners at first. As time went on, a lot of vehicles did gather around us, but they were neutral. They were hands off. They barely spoke to us until the police showed up. After that, it was a pretty different game. They still left us alone around the police, but as we left, they escorted us out. None of the counter-protesters were on site. Their protest was not a direct action kind of thing. They weren't risking arrest or anything. But some miners did escort us out, and one of them wanted to have a conversation with us, and he was bringing up facts, and we were trying to speak to him, but there were about 6 or 7 other guys there just saying, keep it moving, get off my site. So it would have been really cool if we could have talked to him, because it seemed like he was actually open to a discussion. He was asking us questions, we were asking him questions, but given the situation, it didn't quite come together.
I just want to say I'm really thankful that for the most part everybody was safe and sound. It's very impressive that you maintained your balance and you maintained your nonviolent position all the way around. Let's talk a little bit about Dustin Steele now. I think his is a story that should be shared. My understanding is his his family, his grandfather, or back in the family had been miners and all that, and that he is local to the area, correct? He grew up in the area. Is that accurate? So why don't we tell a little bit of Dustin's story and kind of what the situation with him is as of today?
Sure. I love to talk about Dustin Steele. He's a good friend of mine. Yeah, Dustin is from Matewan, West Virginia, down in Mingo County, born and raised. His grandfather, who was the person that raised him, was a underground union coal miner all his working life, and a steadfast opponent of strip mining since it first started coming into southern West Virginia in the 1960s. So his family has been fighting the coal industry both for workers' rights and to stop strip mining, for at least the last 40 years. So he's walking in a proud tradition, coming from his own family, and he got his start just as a teenager, volunteering with some of the local environmental groups, and just turned 21 yesterday, and has been in this movement for 7 or 8 years. I mean, longer than I have, and has really grown a lot. And I think we really saw that on Saturday, and we've seen it throughout the coming days with just his incredible bravery throughout this whole experience, and his incredible eloquence about these issues as well. So yeah, Dustin was one of the folks that went on site and did choose to risk arrest. They were part of a small breakaway group that decided that the rock truck wasn't quite ambitious enough. That once they had taken it, they started to look around for something more interesting. So they ended up being the first people that have ever gone and blocked one of the explosive trucks that actually carries the vacuum agents. And I feel comfortable telling you this on the show because, of course, that's where they were arrested. So we're not telling law enforcement anything that they didn't already know. So they were arrested. They were dragged off the top of the explosives truck that they had stopped, which I thought was an incredibly bold and wonderful move.
It's quite a statement.
How much more direct can you get? They were arrested and taken off site. None too gently, but that really wasn't where the issue happened. I want to speak briefly though to all the other folks that were sort of brutalized during the arrest process. The person that locked themselves to the drag line was reportedly punched and kicked on site.
By the police?
By the state police.
Okay.
Now incarcerated. His direct support was dragged off the site by her pigtails. And a number of people report relatively rough arrest process. This is the first time we've used physical noncompliance on a large scale, so perhaps that's a factor in the police's behavior. I don't know. But yeah, it was a much less gentle arrest process than we've experienced in the past. But the worst of the violence appears to have occurred later, when Dustin and everyone else was taken to Boone County for processing. Where they formally get their charges and get printed by the police. So they didn't take them to a police station for whatever reason. They just took them to this government building with a big field. They were left face down in there. When Dustin was taken in to be processed, as I understand, they were dragged on their back across asphalt and concrete parking lot and dragged up a flight of set of stairs, taken into an interview room where their head was slammed against a wall, and they were punched and kicked by state police for some time. People report hearing, other arrestees report hearing this incident and seeing the blood from it. So when we got this report, when Dustin was finally able to make a phone call from jail, obviously we were very concerned at the time. They were reporting some trouble walking, And obviously this is devastating for all of us. And really, I'd like to say this is the very first time that folks in our movement and doing these kind of actions have been victims of police violence in this way. We have had a few other incidents where people were carried in ways that were not gentle when they were being non-compliant or kind of roughed up in that arrest process. But we've never had an experience like this where someone in custody was literally taken into a room and beaten. So this is something very new for our campaign. It's a very disturbing thing, especially since it is such a dramatic change from the police's behavior in the past.
And your campaign is taking appropriate action to address that, ask for investigation. The petitions are out, so you're all over that. How is Dustin's condition now? He was released, and is he gotten care, and is he going to be okay there?
Yeah, Dustin is Dustin is banged up, but ultimately okay. He's been seen by medical professionals. So fortunately, the injuries were not as severe as we once feared, and I think that's a great relief to all of us. And honestly, they're such an incredible fighter. They even with all the phone calls from from jail, they said, I'm in a lot of pain, but I'm in good spirits. And what's even more remarkable about that is we're fortunate in this arrest. We had a lot of people, so all of the people that were female-bodied identified by the jail as female were in one pod together with no other inmates, and most of the male-bodied people were also in a pod together with no other inmates, except for Dustin, who was in a pod by himself, with other inmates, and the other person that was reportedly beaten by the police on site after being unlocked from the drag line. So they were also placed in a separate pod, separate from those previous two, by themselves. So we think it's telling and disturbing that there seems to have been an intentional effort to isolate the worst victims of police violence from the rest of the group. But even throughout that, Justin's spirits remained really high. I talked to them, and they said, well, they got out. Like I said, yesterday was their birthday, so they got the best birthday present anyone could ever ask for, freedom. So they took some time. There's a wonderful picture of Dustin blowing out their birthday cake from yesterday that's making its rounds online. They obviously sought the necessary medical examinations and those kind of things. But I talked to them. I said, so obviously the media is beating down our door. They want to talk to you. We even had one local TV station that managed to get in and interview Dustin and one other of our arrestees in jail before they were released. And they said, I'm totally still in work mode. Load me up next 2 days. I'm going to take a break this weekend, but I know this is important. I can start at 8:30 in the morning, and just relentlessly on message. And yes, they were a victim of police violence, but it hasn't been what Dustin has wanted to talk the most about. I mean, the jailhouse quote that ran on the local TV wasn't about the state police, and it wasn't about poor me. It was speaking directly to the issues. It was you can look it up. I think we may have finally found some video capture of that and posted that on Facebook. But they're talking about how a lot of people were angry about the action that we took, but when I wake up in the morning and the water running from my tap is red, and it wasn't that way before mountaintop removal, and this is something worth fighting for. And put out a statement this morning. People may have read, totally undeterred from this struggle, and I just think it's their heads up. And they continue to want to do everything they can, both to support the people that are still in, and also to spread this story and to build this movement. None of us are backing down, and least of all Dustin Steele.
Well, good for you. And I want to just take a moment, and because he is just in researching all this, he's an incredible young man. I am, actually humbled by his eloquence, his writing and speaking that I came across. And I want to read one of the quotes that's just on your website. But this is to give an example of somebody who just turned 21 and their commitment to activism. So Dustin Steele says, and I quote, "When you fight oppression anywhere, you fight oppression everywhere." And there's a young man setting the example, speaking the words, and staying focused on the cause at his own expense. But he has his eyes on something much larger than himself or any other individual. And, I hope you will pass along our regards. So I just felt like I wanted to get that little bit in. So as I turn away, it's because I got notes running all over the place here, so I'm trying to keep up with everything. I want to talk a little bit, and Nate, chime in here too. Matthew, you came from New York. Are most of the people that are involved in these sorts of things local to the community or native to the community, or have they come together around this area of West Virginia in order to help? Or is it split? I was just trying to get an idea of the demographic, because then my next question is, what's going to be the community response and community support?
Well, I think that's, it's an interesting question with somewhat of a complex answer. So when it comes to folks that are actually risking arrest, that are going on site, that are doing the kinds of things that Dustin Steele and these 20 other folks did on Saturday, that is mostly people that are not local to Southern West Virginia, or not native to Southern West Virginia. A lot of them, do come from the Appalachian states. But a lot of them come from the Northeast and other places that have come in to support, and a big part of the reason for that is the risk. You know what I mean? To folks that are from here, from taking actions like this, is a lot higher than it is for us outsiders. No matter how much they scream "tree hugger, go home," the people that the other side saves the worst of its venom for are other people from Southern West Virginia. And frankly, and I hate to say it, I think that's probably a big part of the reason why Dustin was singled out for violence in this action. I can't confirm that, but Dustin is the only person on that action who was born and raised in Southern West Virginia, and he's the only one that was taken into a back room and beaten. So I think that's very telling. And local leaders who've done, who've spoken out and done, an incredible amount of other sort of work, much less radical than what some of the things that we have done with our bodies have faced, far more violence, death threats. I mean, Larry Gibson has had drive-by shootings at his house. It's been robbed. His dogs have been killed, and and a lot of them, are able to do some of the less, the line crossings, the sit-ins at governor's offices, congressional offices. You see a lot more local people that are able to do that, but their health is compromised. They've got kids, they've got parents, they've got people that rely on them.
Right.
They don't have the financial resources. They don't have the kind of support networks that we do. A lot of people count on them, and they can't take the same kind of risks. And they also face, not only can they not take the same kind of risks, is they face much more serious repercussions than we do for taking the same actions. So that's a big part of the reason why they've explicitly asked us and people like us to come in and do things that they can't do as easily and as safely as we can. To be honest, if things get really hot for most of the people that are taking direct action. They can go home if they want to.
Right.
The folks that live here, they are home.
Right.
So if things get too hot, they just sleep next to a shotgun, because they don't have any other choices,
Yeah.
right? And we do. But that being said, the movement as a whole is mostly formed from and certainly led by, lifelong residents of the West Virginia coalfields and typically, many generations back with roots here. Those folks were fighting this fight before any of us showed up. They asked us to come, and they still lead the way, and they frankly tell us what to do. And while they may not be out there getting arrested, they're doing the things that make our work possible.
Mm-hmm.
We could never have done this action if it wasn't for James and Susan Tawney that so generously let us have this on their farm. We could never have rented a space in a public park for this. We would have been run out of there. We faced violence and harassment at the camp where we were based continuously. And if it wasn't for the fact that it was James's private property and he sat at the end of that road every night, armed, there's no way we could have safely done this action. And be prepared for it. So, and the risks that James has taken and Susan, in every way are equal to the risks that those of us from outside had taken by going onto these sites in the first place.
Good. Nate, what was your observation of the community as kind of an outside observer? Or did you have much opportunity to engage with the community at large?
I had a pretty good opportunity. It was interesting because you have the native West Virginians or many of the organizers and everybody else. We came together and it was we were all basically in the same shoes where we were just overwhelmed with this is huge. There's a ton behind this, and I would almost say that 3 days of training wasn't enough. We needed more history on coal mining and more, just more teach-ins and, to take it all in. But we did, come to really understand it, and, I know a lot of us are coming back. And
Good. If you guys are up for it, I'd like to just run some of the questions by that came from the chat stream. If you have time, Matthew, do you have time for it?
Sure. This is recreational media work.
I'm glad we can be the fluff. Okay, so somebody wanted us to place it geographically with a landmark, southern West Virginia. Give us like the largest town or city just so they can picture it.
Right, so the Hobet surface mine is on the Boone County-Lincoln County line. It's about an hour southwest of Charleston.
Okay.
Or one of the only cities anyone would have heard of. It's closer to Madison, but I don't expect you to have heard of that.
Yeah. Okay.
Hobet is spelled H-O-B-E-T.
H-O-B-E-T. Excellent. Thank you. The manufacturer, any of the people blocking got arrested. Well, here's the question of the evening, and this is coming from a lot of directions, and I think it's worth talking about. The actions to stop mountaintop removal directly affect. Oh, excuse me, this thing's thinking I went to sleep. Affect the jobs and livelihoods of the people who work there. So, but it also affects their health and well-being. So it's a double-edged sword, right? So the question becomes, all right, if we address the mountaintop removal issue, what are those people who depend on that for a livelihood supposed to do?
This is a question that got asked of us a lot of times on Saturday, and it's a question that gets asked of us continuously in the movement. And I think that there is no short and simple answer to it, and I won't give you one. Mm-hmm. I think that's disingenuous. But But I would like to talk about this. This is a really central issue, and I think something I wanted to talk about anyways, more about part of why this mine was chosen in the first place, besides the fact that it just is the biggest one.
Right.
And so, right, okay, there's a lot of truth to that. They really aggressively created a mono economy in southern West Virginia, right? They have tried. They actively try. The coal industry actively works to make sure it stays the only game in town. And it has done that for a long time because people that are dependent are people that can't resist. Why is there huge mobs of people out there opposing us when we do these actions and no huge mob of people supporting us when all the polling numbers say that coal fields are pretty close to split 50-50 on the issue of strip mining? It's because of intimidation and fear that comes from the control of that one industry has over this place. So it is a really serious issue. But who has been taking away the jobs of hardworking coal miners? I'd like to claim that we were really effective, but it's very few mining operations have actually closed as a result of our efforts, though, I won't say none. And who's been taking the coal miners' jobs? Well, it's mechanization within the coal industry. Mountaintop removal, you didn't see that many employees, miners on site when you did the action because there aren't very many. Mountaintop removal employs a very, very small fraction of people that traditional underground mining methods did. And if you look at the mining jobs that are left in our state, and there aren't, we're putting out roughly the same amount of coal we were in the 1950s while employing 10% of the people. And if you look at that, how many of those folks are working on strip mines? Well, even though strip mines are 60% of production roughly, it's only about 25% of the workforce. So, most coal miners in West Virginia are not surface miners. Most of them are working underground. And if mountaintop removal was banned, then the demand for coal and for West Virginia coal would have to be supplied entirely underground. So arguably, that would result in an increase in employment. And what we've seen in 2009, the Obama administration took some small steps towards cracking down on mountaintop removal. Not anything close to what we would like to see, but we look at there were figures published last year, right, that showed that surface mine production had gone down since that time, since Obama took office, but coal mine employment in West Virginia had gone up. So I think we have tangible evidence for that argument that banning surface mining does not mean banning coal mining, and in fact may ultimately not have all of that detrimental an effect even on the workforce within the coal industry. What is going to have a devastating effect on the workforce in the coal industry is the coming crash of the Central Appalachian coal market that we have been warning about for years, and is starting to happen now. It is happening right now. There have been a lot of layoffs. Partly why there was such an intense response to this action is that a lot of mines have been shutting down and cutting back production, and it's because the global economy is, a disaster. Most of the money these days that gets made off of the most money that gets made off this of Appalachian coal these days is for steel making coal that we ship overseas to Europe and South America primarily. And with the European economy collapse, that market's down. Natural gas, because of hydrofracking, is so cheap that the utilities are running away from coal. We've had warm winters because of global warming caused by coal, and so demand is just way down. And Central Appalachian coal, they've been mining it so long, most of it's gone. There's very little economically mineable coal, and the coal companies are losing money for the lower value coals, the coal for electricity, the steam, what they call steam coal. The reason why production's shutting down is that not because that the government's closing them. I wish they were, but because the coal operators aren't making any money anymore because it's costing them more to mine than they can sell it for, and they're seeing increasing competition from other markets. We've been telling people this is going to happen for years and years, and talking about the need for a transition in West Virginia, transition in Appalachia to a different economy that's going to provide a viable future here. And it's the coal industry and their supporters and their bought politicians that have been lying to the people, saying, oh, don't worry, coal's going to take care of you forever. There's 150 years of coal left. And us out here supposedly trying to take your jobs away are the people that have been advocating vociferously for years about the need for economic diversification and the need for other options to come to southern West Virginia. The answer to what those options are is a complex puzzle. I'm not a small business developer. I'm not an economic policy expert. I can think of a few things that I think would be a good idea, but really the call is that it's the responsibility of the government, of the federal government and the state government to ensure a future. This is an area that is sacrificed, right? These hardworking coal miners, and they are hardworking coal miners, they really have provided the power for this country for a long time. They put aside their union struggles during the two world wars because they knew that the country needed the coal, and they were willing to put their concerns to the side for the good of the country, and they've sacrificed, and what they've been left with is some of the sickest and poorest counties in Appalachia, and indeed some of the sickest and poorest counties in the country. And we think there needs to be an immediate reinvestment in Appalachia. And what that looks like, I'm not a policy expert when it comes to economics. Does it look like job training funds? Probably. Does it look like federally funded programs to clean up pollution from past mining through the Abandoned Minelands program being fully funded for the first time and putting people back to work, actually restoring the land instead of tearing it up? Does it look like small business development funds? One of the proposals that's being floated in West Virginia right now is that with the minerals that we do have left that are still being mined, that we need to create a future fund. Some percentage that needs to be taxed and put into a fund that can be used to then diversify the economy as those industries pull out. And the mine we were on is such a perfect microcosm of what's happening here, because Patriot Coal, which owned that mine, just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, right? Just 2 weeks before our action, because their debt was unsustainable, right? These companies are failing, and what are they trying to do now why are they filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy? Well, they want to get out of some of their debt obligations. What are those debt obligations? Union pensions, right? Patriot is one of the more union coal mining companies left. The union's largely been broken, but Patriot's got more union miners than anyone else. And they've got 10,000 retired union coal miners, mostly worked underground, and that they were promised their pensions and their health care and gave their lives and their health with the assurance that they would be taken, and they and their families would be taken care of in their old age. And now that the money's running out, how does Patriot want to deal with that situation? They want to, restructure the pensions, otherwise known, take them away. And they're in federal court with the UMWA right now, and that's a message that we carried on our action, that we put out, in our media. These pensions need to be honored. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but that we see it as an attack on our community, those of us that live and work here, because retired union coal miners, underground coal miners, and their families are one of the constituencies in southern West Virginia that tends to oppose strip mining. Until the 1990s, the union fought strip mining hard. It was a non-union industry. It was new. It was coming in. It was shutting down underground union mines. It was a big part of breaking the union. And until the leadership struck a devil's bargain with the industry, they were vociferously opposed to surface mining, and a lot of their rank and file retired membership still are. And frankly, a huge percentage of the dear friends I've made and the people that have taken me in as family are dependent on these UMWA pensions. People that are in our movement are dependent on these UMWA pensions. And just like they're trying to get out of their obligations to clean up the land and to clean up their water pollution before they get out of Dodge. They're trying to get out of their pensions. They just like, they disregard environmental law and fight tooth and nail to prevent any new law from being passed to protect communities. They fight their protections for their workers just as hard, and they disregard those rules just as hard. Black lung was supposed to be eliminated decades ago by the laws that were passed, and we're finding that there's a new epidemic because none of the regulations are being enforced to protect underground coal miners and their health. We're finding out that surface miners are actually at risk from silicosis, and that folks that work as drillers have a 62% chance, if they spend their whole careers as drillers for the stripping industry, of contracting a virulent form of silicosis and dying.
Coal miner was killed just the other day.
But yeah, go ahead.
What was he got his crushing injuries. He was on a mountaintop removal site somewhere.
He's underground, but yeah.
Was it underground?
Yeah.
So yeah,
mining equipment.
right.
And so we think that the parallels are really strong between the way they treat their workers and the way they treat the environment and the communities around them.
Mm-hmm.
And they aren't our enemies, the folks that are stuck in this situation. And I wish that the coal industry, the coal operators, and the politicians would stop pushing this really disingenuous propaganda and stirring up these folks to be angry at the wrong people, instead of us being able to sit down across a line and say, across these lines and say, okay, we may not agree about everything. You may not believe in global warming. I might believe in global warming. You may not. There's a lot of things. I might think that coal mining is inherently damaging to the communities around it, and you may not believe that. But we've got some common problems that we need to get together and figure out how to solve as a group. And from what when I talk to most miners, most miners that I've talked to, they say, if there was something else, I'd do that. Mm-hmm. I'll work any job. This is how I feed my kids. They're not cultish. There's some segments of West Virginia sort of society that has this cultish relationship with coal. Mm-hmm. But most of the miners I've talked to, it's a dirty, dangerous, scary job to do, and a lot of them, if they had another option, and you'll talk to them, you'll say, well, what about your kids? The coal's running out. They're not going to be able to work in coal. And they say, I don't want my kid to work in coal. I'm working in coal so I can have enough money to send them to school so they don't have to. Right. Well, we don't want them to have to either. And until we come together as West Virginians, as Appalachians, and as Americans and demand another future, the politicians aren't going to supply one. The coal operators aren't going to supply one. And frankly, the jobs that they're so worried about losing are going to be gone, whether they beat up and scare off all the tree huggers or not. So are we going to get together and figure out a future for Appalachia where people can be happy and healthy and stay in their communities? I think that depends a lot on what happens over the next 5 years. They're talking about 60% declines in production by 2020. So if we don't start getting this right and we don't start coming together and working together to fight for a future that works for everybody that lives in southern West Virginia and across Appalachia, it's going to be an ugly scene here. Because if coal pulls out, when coal pulls out, if people haven't fought for something better to take its place and fought for an alternative, it is going to be an ugly scene. A lot of people are going to have to move, and a lot of people are going to be really poor. And obviously that's not our goal. But we look around and say a lot of people have had to move, and a lot of people are really poor now.
Right.
Still going up the mountains. Right. If coal is so good for the economy here, why is West Virginia so poor? Why are the counties that mine the most coal the poorest counties? Especially those that strip mine coal. So you can look at a poverty map and a mountaintop removal map of Appalachia, and it's remarkable how closely they match up. So, people not only need something else for the future, because coal is leaving, but they deserve something better right now.
That was a beautiful answer to an oversimplified question, which I knew was oversimplified when I asked it, but that is exactly where I wanted that to go, to have that broad discussion. And I really admire and respect you that you say, you know, it's complex and you don't have an answer, and that it requires a lot of conversation. I just want to make the point that the coal mining companies are in the extraction business, which is extracting from the land, extracting the minerals at the expense of everything around them, including the people, because they're extracting life from the people around them, and they could care less. And your illustration about pensions is a perfect one. They strip the coal off the mountainside, and they strip the pensions from the people who did their part, who gave their lives, you know, who fulfilled their part of the bargain, and now arbitrarily are facing, you know, just all kinds of disaster from that. So thank you for speaking to all that. I want to catch the questions.
Interrupt real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I, my phone's about to die, and I'm pretty wiped out from traveling all day today, so I'm going to step out a little early.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Nate. I know it's been a long evening, but it's been wonderful to have you, and thank you for your observations and your work. And we'll be talking to you soon.
All right, and to, I guess, everybody viewing out there, if you want to continue following me, I'm a live streamer. If you don't know me, I go by the name of Occupy EYE, Occupy I. You can follow that handle on Twitter. Occupy EYE is the Twitter handle. And Matt, thanks so much for coming out here too. And you know, I told you Mark was a great guy. So.
Did he tell you I was long-winded? Thank you, Nate. Take care, buddy.
Get some rest. I look forward to seeing you down here again.
All right. Well, tell me where and when, man, and I'll be there. Thanks.
It's been a pleasure.
Matthew, you want to give us any closing thoughts? I think we touched on all the questions that were pretty significant. Anything else you would like to offer up for the listeners to consider?
I just gave you my big closer speech.
That was wonderful.
That was the shebang.
Yeah.
I just this is a complex struggle, and it's not one that is going to be won overnight. And I just really encourage people. You know, there are moments like these where attention is drawn to these struggles that have been going on for so long. People have fought strip mining here literally since they started doing it. You know, and I'm proud to walk in a 50-year history of resistance, and a lot of people from the outside that don't maybe understand what we're up against and the kind of David and Goliath struggle that fighting the coal industry in Appalachia really is. You know, oftentimes say, well, have you won yet? You know, you've been down there fighting mountaintop rule for a few years. Is it over? And it's not over. And you know, Obama came in and people were like, oh, well, he's going to take care of it. And then the EPA took a few small steps that were big, were important, and were certainly more progress than this movement had seen in a long time. And as soon as that started happening, and there was permitting delays, and a few permits were turned down and stuff, people said, "Oh, well, they've stopped that all already, haven't they?" Obama's taking care of it, and the reality is that's not the case. And the steps that the Obama administration, that the EPA has been willing to take, you know, there were several important steps that they took to curtail valley fill permitting when they take the rubble and they fill the streams with it. And they had sort of three major things that they did to try to crack down on that practice, and it was quite successful. You know, last year there was only one new valley fill permitted in the state, and it was very, very small, 500 feet. So that was a huge victory for us. Well, now we found out just 2 days after this action that a federal courts had struck down two of those three, you know, strong actions that the EPA had taken, and sort of the most important one, this new water quality guidance they had issued, was was sort of our last best hope for continuing to hold off some of the worst of these projects. And we just got word Monday that that's been struck down by a district court in D.C. as well. So far from being over, the struggle is intensifying, and I think this action this weekend was really the beginning of us taking this to a new level. So, for everyone that's become aware of this, we encourage you to go out, get yourself more educated, figure out how you can plug in. Like we said, you want to come down to RAMPS and you want to get yourself arrested, then come on down. We're ready anytime. But if if that's not your capacity, if you're a scientist, if you're a educator, if you're a, bright-eyed college student that just wants to learn how to do something different, you want to, you want to lobby your politicians, you want to learn how to dig into the science and bust coal companies on their violations when they break the law. You want to go door to door, do community organizing. You want to organize support networks in your own community to support the work that's going on the ground here. This movement is doing a lot of different things and using a lot of different tactics, and there's really room here for everybody. And we think this is really an iconic anti-extraction struggle at a time when we see that uprising across the country you referenced earlier. Not only was there the frack attack rally in D.C. and a lot of the stuff at the Northeast Governors Conference was also focused in Burlington, was also focused on environmental issues, but the tar sands blockade had their first big training, and they're going to be launching a series of actions the rest of this month and into September to try to stop the Keystone XL pipeline. And just next week, the coal export action in Helena, Montana is fighting the export of Western coal, particularly the growing market to move it to Asia. And then, recently there was a new event announced to try to keep fracking out of New York State, out of my home turf. Don't Frack New York. They're planning a large action towards the end of this month. So if you can't plug in with us, if you're somewhere else out in the country, and even if you can plug in with us, plug into the anti-extraction struggle in your backyard. This movement can only be successful if we're a unified national movement fighting these out-of-control corporations and the politicians that they own that are devastating the land that we all depend on and leaving us with extraction-based economies that are hollow and temporary. We work in solidarity with all of these struggles across the country, and no matter where you are, there's a place to be a part of this fight, fighting your local power plant, your local bank that finances all these operations, fighting your school to close your campus coal plant or to get their endowment divested out of fossil fuels, out of the dirty coal industry. The most important thing you can do is take a step and take a stand where you are. And if you find time within that struggle in your own community that I know you're going to immerse yourself in, come on and see us and pay a visit and pitch in here.
Well, on behalf of the OPN channel and all the people that are watching and the other channels that are mirroring, we want to thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for spending your evening with us. It was incredibly educational, informative, and inspiring. So keep up the work, stay strong. We're posting all your information out for people to have access to it. We've put your links in as we've been speaking, so hopefully this will help get the word out. So you have our sincere gratitude and appreciation, and I wish you well and hope to stay in touch.
It's been a pleasure. Take care.